Bed by Lemony Snicket, and I was going to read it for a bedtime story, but I had two helpers who wanted to do it with me.
They didn't exactly want to. She kind of just bribed them into it.
Composer is a word which here means a person who sits in a room
Muttering and humming and figuring out which notes the orchestra is going to play.
This is called...
We need a whole sleeping here.
No, don't worry. Come on, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It has to be soft. This is called composing. But last night, the composer was not muttering. He was not humming. He was not even moving or even breathing. This is called decomposing. The composer's death is very suspicious. And so the inspector was called in to find the murderer or murderers and haul them off to jail.
I'll begin by interviewing the usual suspects. Like all the people in his line of work, this composer had many enemies lurking in the orchestra. They can lurk all they like, but I'll find them wherever they are lurking. I'll find them if they are lurking in the strings. I will find them if they are lurking in the brass. I'll find them if they are lurking in the woodwinds. I will find them if they are lurking in the percussion section. I will find them wherever they are lurking. I will find them.
The inspector was a very handsome and intelligent person, not unlike myself.
I swear in my own intelligence and good looks, I will solve the terrible crime against humanity and or classical music.
And with an intelligent, if somewhat flamboyant gesture, he reached into his pocket and took out the notebook he used for all official business. Go ahead.
I forgot.
It's okay. Keep going.
My notebook that I used for official business.
First,
thou shalt interrogate the strings. Strings, where were you on the night in question?
the violins answered first, of course. The violin section is divided into the first violins, and who have the trickier parts to play, and the second violins, who are much more fun at parties.
We were performing a waltz,
Said the violins.
We played graceful melodies so the ladies and gentlemen could spin around and around and around until they felt dizzy and somewhat nauseous. This kept us busy all night.
Perhaps you murdered the inspector from the composer for making you play so much.
Don't be ridiculous.
Said the violins.
Violins are stars of any orchestra. If we killed the composer, we would have to find work at square dances or in romantic restaurants.
That's true.
The inspector admitted.
What about you, cellos and basses?
The cello and basses sighed. The cello and basses are often weary from dragging their large bodies around. The basses in particular are so enormous that they can't even fit into taxicabs without sticking their curly heads out of the window.
We were providing a compliment,
They said.
You can't waltz without a reliable 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's boring, but it's steady work.
Perhaps you murdered the composer for giving you such boring things to play.
On the
The
contrary,
cellos and basses said.
we don't feel the need to show off like certain stringed instruments we could mention.
Well, I guess that takes cello strings.
The inspector said.
Oh, violas. I forgot all about you.
Everyone forgets about us.
David.
Said
Oh,
the
yeah.
violas bitterly.
You didn't do that part.
Everyone forgets about us.
Said the violas bitterly.
We play the notes and the chords that nobody cares about. We play crucial counter melodies nobody hears. We often have to stay late after performances and stack up all of the chairs. We spent last night feeling sorry for ourselves as usual. But we did notice that the concertmaster was acting strange. He was talking and laughing with the composer and carrying a strange black case.
Now the concertmaster is the best violin player in the entire orchestra, and is often accused of treachery. I was talking with the composer about my cadenza, she said, using a word which here means fancy solo part. I'd never murder someone who is giving me such an excellent opportunity to show off.
Oh, that's very good alibis.
The inspector said, taking notes in his notebook.
But the composer is still dead. Perhaps the murderer is lurking in the woodlands. Where were you last night, woodlands?
We were doing bird imitations.
Said the flutes, the shiniest and highest pitched woodwinds in the orchestra.
It seems that that's all we ever do. Whenever the orchestra needs a bird, there we are.
Perhaps you murdered the composer for making you play like birds.
Don't make us laugh.
The flutes cried.
They're much too wimpy and high-pitched for murder. As for the reed instruments, they're much snakier than us.
Sneaky?
said the clarinets.
We're not sneaky. By the way, Inspector, that's a very handsome jacket you are wearing.
Oh, thank you.
Said the inspector.
Such shiny buttons.
Said the bassoons.
You think so?
And the color is very flattering.
Said the oboes.
Really?
The inspector said.
Oh. That's very kind of you to say. Why are you giggling, flutes?
Ignore them.
Said the first oboe, leaning in close.
If I were you, I'd question the brass instruments instead. They're a violent lot.
Brass?
The inspector said, writing in his notebook.
You think so?
You can trust me.
The oboe said.
Everyone trusts me. After all, I tune up the entire orchestra by playing an A.
Can't argue with that.
The inspector said.
Brass, what do you have to say for yourselves?
Last night was incredibly important for us.
Proclaimed the trumpets in a boisterous manner, a phrase which here means loudly and with a certain arrogant rudeness.
We announced the arrival of kings and presidents. We led soldiers into battle and held a parade when they got home. Our ears are still ringing from all the ruckus.
I'd say that's a big thing.
Making notes in his notebook.
Perhaps you murdered the composer for making you play so loud.
We love being loud.
The trumpets replied.
Brass instruments are brassy by nature. Besides, loud is patriotic, and we suspect the murder was committed by a foreigner.
A foreigner?
The inspector repeated.
What say you, French horns? You have a strange accent.
The French horns did not understand the question, and began murmuring a story about the old country.
Leave the French horns alone.
The trombone said.
They were in such a state that we took them out to the club to cheer them up. We ordered a few bottles of expensive wine and then took the stage, swinging and dancing until dawn.
We were there too.
Said the percussion instruments, barging in as only percussion instruments can do.
We drummed, we percussed, we employed xylophoniness and symbolism. We heard the beat and beat the herd. We struck up and got down. We conquered the concert, battered the band, agitated the audience, rattled the roof, and got the low numbers of several very attractive young ladies. By then we were beat, too exhausted to commit murder.
What about you, Tuba?
The inspector said.
Are you part of these distasteful shenanigans?
No,
The tuba said.
I'm a confirmed bachelor. I was home all night playing cards with my landlady at the park, taking sips of warm milk from a little blue cup.
The inspector flipped through the pages of his notebook and scratched his handsome head with a well-manicured hand.
What manicured hand? I'm utterly baffled.
He said.
I've questioned the entire orchestra and none of them seems to be the murderer. The violins waltzed, the cellos and basses provided the violas mourned their fate while the concertmaster showed up. The flutes did bird imitations repeatedly, and the reed instruments had the good taste to admire my jacket. The trumpets held a parade in honor of our great country, while the French horns waxed nostalgic about something or other. Some bones had too much to drink. The percussion beat the band, and the tuba was stayed at home playing cards with his landlady at the hut, taking sips of warm milk from a little blue cup. But the composer is still dead.
A strange noise caught the inspector's ears.
Of course. The conductor. You've been murdering composers for years. In fact, wherever there's a conductor, you're sure to find a dead composer.
Who starts?
Beethoven, dead.
Bach, dead.
Brahms, dead.
Mozart, dead.
Haydn, dead.
Schubert, unfinished, but dead.
Mahler, dead.
Chopin, romantic, but dead.
Tchaikovsky, dramatic, dead.
Stravinsky, ecstatic, dead.
Schoenberg, incomprehensible, but dead.
Berlioz, dead.
Purcell, dead.
Prokofiev,
Dead.
dead.
Debussy, dead.
Vivaldi,
Wagner,
Sibelius,
Ives,
Handel,
Britten,
Mendelssohn,
Scriabin,
Liszt,
Messiaen,
Copland,
Cage,
Dvorak,
Shostakovich,
Ligeti,
Lutoslavsky,
Corelli,
Bellini,
Puccini, Fassini,
Rossini,
Scarlatti,
Busoni,
Boccherini,
Verdi,
J.C. Bach,
W.F. Bach,
C.P.E. Bach.
Offenbach.
Dead composers litter the musical world, and it's all because of one man. Arrest him at once!
Not so fast!
said the entire orchestra in unison. The conductor didn't work alone. All of us have butchered a composer at one time or another. But we also keep composers alive. Without strings and woodwinds, without brass and percussion, there would be no composing at all.
Except for various kinds of non-orchestral music.
If you want to hear the work of the world's greatest composers, you're going to have to allow for a little murder here and there,
But that's injustice.
cried the inspector. Those who want justice, said the orchestra, can go to the police. But those who want something a little more interesting,
Should go to the orchestra!
the end.
Yay!